Hi, everyone, and welcome to our In Conversation with Gowling WLG series. My name is Ryan Steeves, and I'm a lawyer in the Ottawa, Canada office of Gowling WLG. In this series of podcasts, we try to probe, generally speaking, the world of intellectual property. And throughout the series, we're trying to build a picture of how the IP world works and gain insights to trends, developments, and hear from leaders in various intellectual property industries globally. And today we are extremely fortunate to have someone who I'm fortunate to call a friend. This is Patrick Rogers. And Patrick is the newly appointed CEO of Music Canada. And Music Canada is a trade association for Canada's major record labels here in Canada, Sony, Universal, and Warner. Patrick has been with Music Canada for about 5 years now, since 2016. And he's been largely in charge of, in his past time, in earlier days with Music Canada, informing and really putting into practice Music Canada's advocacy strategy. And so there's a number of amazing achievements that Patrick spearheaded over that time in such a short time. But a lot of this stems from Patrick's previous experiences and career in federal politics in Canada. And he's worked sort of at every level you can imagine within federal politics, it seems, in many important offices like the Prime Minister's office, Director of Policy. And so politically, I think he's had a number of jobs that have really made him a leader in the music industry and, generally speaking, the cultural industries in Canada, because he brings that perspective of what it takes to generally speaking, help these industries get better. And so with that long-winded intro, Patrick, I'll say one more thing, is that Patrick, who's a good friend of mine, and I have to disclaim, I worked at Music Canada a number of years ago with Patrick closely. And I have to say, Patrick is one of these people that is the reason we do podcasts, really. I mean, Patrick, you have some fascinating experiences that I think a lot of our listeners will find very, very insightful today. So thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for that introduction. I mean, I'm always happy to talk about the machinery of government and how we can help the cultural industries succeed here in Canada and around the world. It's a big part of what we do.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so for our listeners, I guess here's what we want to talk about today. Three main things. Who you are, that is, who is Music Canada, and what are you doing in terms of shaping advocacy and the conversation around policymaking, sort of at a high level. And then we'll look at what is actually happening in Canada with respect to copyright. This is the driving force of the music industry, which is an interesting concept in itself that we'll get you to talk about, and how listeners in maybe other industries or other jurisdictions can even draw parallels to what they're facing. And then we'll touch on why reform generally is so hard to do. How is it so hard that industries need to go through such challenges to get meaningful change done, legally speaking, through advocacy, and why that's so hard? And so let's just get right into it. First of all, I want to say kudos to the Music Canada team. You're a trade organization for the major labels in Canada, as well as the artists and their partners. But you've really pivoted during COVID to move your focus away from some of the more traditional work that Music Canada has done to just trying to help the most vulnerable in the music sector, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that shift lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, COVID, is, obviously it's affected everyone in incredibly personal ways. You and I are sitting here on a Zoom call from our own homes, something that we never, places that with our jobs we rarely saw. Now we see the inside of them now all the time. And with COVID in Canada and the music experience, it obviously, that day where the world shut down, at least here in North America, was the week before our great national celebration of music, the Junos. And so to have that be the first thing that was wiped out was a real marker for us. And our members, as you said, Sony, Warner, and Universal here in Canada, were very clear from the very beginning that it was going to be our friends in live, it was going to be our artists, it was going to be the technicians, the venue owners, the people who make a living by people gathering en masse to listen to their craft, they were going to be the ones who were going to be hurt the hardest. And lots of people got lots of things wrong at the very beginning of this pandemic, but we got that right. And so we've invested our time, our resources, our advocacy skill, our legal skill to making sure that everybody in our sort of ecosystem was being represented during some pretty tough conversations. And I'll just quickly give you sort of the best example of that was that in Canada, we have the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit and now the Relief Benefit. And initially, artists' royalty payments was going to affect the calculation of how they got their money. And, we were able to jump in and say, hang on, this is not a reasonable understanding of income. This is, treated by the tax code as investment. And can we make that work? So we put a real emphasis on that. And I think that's the best example of where we've been able to help.
Well, that's great. That's great. Wonderful. I mean, and like I said, kudos to your team for taking on that. I call it a shift. I mean, you're always engaged in that kind of work, it seems, at Music Canada, but I want to get to one of the more, I call it traditional, for lack of a better words, roles that Music Canada has played, and that is copyright, generally speaking. And copyright is such an important thing, and many people maybe don't realize it. When people hear copyright in music, I mean, they go back to legal streaming days, but there's so much within the governing statute, that is the Copyright Act in Canada, that dictates how people in the music industry get paid and how they earn a living. And so maybe you can just talk about why copyright is so important to Music Canada and its members.
Yeah, I mean, we capture this by saying that we believe artists should be paid when their music is played. And it's the Copyright Act that makes that happen. It's the words on those pages that are the most important to ensuring that happens. And for us here in Canada, there's a couple of words on those pages that stop it from happening. And so we have a couple of exceptions that reflect moments in time from 1997, when radio was the only place you could hear music that wasn't in your own home. And we think those things should be changed. And all we're ever looking for is a functioning framework that represents the best principles internationally so that people get paid.
Right. Okay. And one of the more recent activities going on in Canada right now is the Copyright Act has a provision that says the law needs to be reviewed every 5 years by a parliamentary committee. So as I understand it, in June of 2019, the government finished what was a fairly comprehensive review from more than 50 stakeholders, days and days of hearings, and put together a report with recommendations on what the focus should be in reviewing, or I guess in implementing changes to the Copyright Act. And so I know a number would be very important to you, but there was one line in this report that stuck out to me, in the foreword actually, which said that the Copyright Act impacts Canadians every day, shaping what we see and hear and enhancing our systems for the creation and use of content. And that really stood out to me as to what your goals are, right? I mean, it's the fact that copyright impacts artists down to the word, a single word in an act. And so I just wanted to know your thoughts on that concept and how it impacts your approach to legal reform.
Yeah, I think that the sort of principles behind the government's review were really strong. There was an understanding, in a pre-COVID time, as far away as that feels right now, that artists were in need of some support there, not just music artists, but publishers, like book publishing and the sort of cultural community, that things had gotten out of whack a little bit. And I look to the Heritage Committee's report, chaired by Julie DeBruzen, where they called out that the government needed to provide some more support to move some levers here to make sure that, as we say, that artists get paid when their music's played. And so it was really great to see that line that you quoted. Talk about artists, talk about the creation, talk about making sure that people are able to make a livelihood out of this. Right. And less of the sort of mumbo jumbo about users' rights and those kinds of things.
Right. Okay. And maybe quickly, recommendation 1 I thought was very interesting, because recommendation 1, to refresh your memory, is actually removing the requirement to have a 5-year review. So a 5-year review leads to the first recommendation being end the 5-year review. And at first blush, it was concerning to see, because it's hard enough to get a review done because of the fear that it leads to this mass debate that no one can ever agree on. But in a way, you and I have talked about this before, that is there merit to this concept that, okay, we're not going to wait 5 years to make changes. There's a change, something's leaking, we need to fix it. So what do you think about that concept? Maybe, not even as much recommendation 1, but this idea that something that affects people so much in their daily lives needs to be adjusted more than every 5 years.
Yeah, look, I think it's fascinating, because quickly on the 5-year review, I am in favor of writing down somewhere that government has to do it, because I think copyright is too easy to avoid. I mean, we're 4 years into the 5-year review at this stage, and so I think that speaks to the need for some kind of check-in. But that being said, I think there is a growing understanding that this idea that copyright in and of itself is just this sort of teetering house of cards, and that any one change might interfere with the change, the entire structural, stability of the entire program.
Right.
That's not true of the criminal code. That's not true of the Income Tax Act. I don't think that we have to do this, and I think that it does, and I think we're headed to this place, but I think it leads to a really unhelpful horse trading. I think it leads to really unhelpful sort of fiefdom making within the system. And so sign me up for more pressing, relevant copyright changes. I think we would be very supportive of that.
Right. Okay. And that's a whole other conversation about the pace with which technology changes and this lagging statute that is just constantly trying to catch up, right?
Well, I mean, this is one of my most proudest government accomplishments, that in 2012, the government that I worked in made use of the VCR legal in Canada. I think that it's the perfect example of how technology and societal use outpace government.
Right. Okay. One of the last points I want to touch on under this heading of why copyright matters to you and your members, as well as I'd say the cultural industries generally, is you said something I thought was fascinating and so on point during your committee appearance. And this is what I've always loved about and respected about you, Patrick, is that you're one of these rare people who can come into something with very little understanding, but crafted in a way that everyone can understand better. And your comment at committee was, I hope this committee and government will return to that work soon, meaning the review and implementing changes, because the pandemic eliminating opportunities to tour for artists. The fallacy that artists don't need copyright protection has been exposed from the myth that it always was. And so that being that artists are going to be fine because they can tour. But what is copyright laws are so vitally important. As we talked about, a couple of words would turn something so vital for artists to earn more money. So I just thought that was such a great comment, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit for a few minutes on what you mean by this fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, long before you and I joined the Music Canada world, other colleagues of ours were fighting this fight on the creation of rights for artists, and the pushback on them has always been that copyright is the place of major corporations and shady businesses in the background, and that artists don't even really want to be involved in that, because you have to be a lawyer to really understand it, and what they want to do is be out on the road.
Right.
And our former boss and our past colleagues would sit at committees and provide names of artists who had fallen ill, or women who decide to have children and leave the road, and saying that these people need and deserve copyright. And opponents of strong copyright protection for artists would say, oh, those are corner cases. Well,
right.
in roughly 1 year ago, we turned off touring around the world. And we are seeing artists say that they wish to have stronger copyright, and here we are. These are no longer corner cases, and we're as committed to this now as ever before.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's so great, Patrick. I think that's a perfect segue into the next topic, which is, why is this such a challenge? Why is getting things done such a challenge? And you have such a unique perspective, I think, for listeners, whether they're in Canada or in any jurisdiction listening, because of your understanding of the machinery of federal government and the approach to policymaking and how government works. When I left Music Canada, you'll probably remember this, Patrick. You gave me a book, Beauchene's Parliamentary Rules and Forms, and I loved it because you included a note on the inside, and I won't read it exactly, but basically it says, "Here's a new fancy book, but please don't use it. Just call me." And and that just goes to show what you bring to this industry. First and foremost, a passion to just make it better, but secondly, an understanding of how things can get done in a positive way that don't just benefit people you're representing and working with, but everybody in the ecosystem. And so I want you to talk a little bit about, first of all, why is it so hard to get things done when you're an industry? Why is it so hard? So maybe you can talk about the machinery of government and how that's so hard.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is just sort of take you through my personal journey of copyright here, and sort of knock off a couple of these points. So, I mean, in minority government in Canada, so where the government doesn't have enough votes on their own to pass legislation, they need opposition votes. We had a copyright reform bill similar to the previous 5-year review. It was long overdue. It needed to be done. But copyright's not great politics. And so as somebody who wasn't invested in the file, I just saw this file from afar and saw there were really committed stakeholders on either side. No one seemed happy by any changes. Nothing was ever enough. And when you're a government writ large and you have 100 things that need to get done, the ones that are going to make no one happy and the ones that don't seem to provide any political win at all, those go to the bottom of the list. And I think my experience has been with people who are content experts and true believers. That line is infuriating when I say it out loud. And you've been in meetings with me where I make them even angrier because I get the giggles when people are infuriated by it. It's the most simple political explanation I can provide, and people hate it. And so then when I went to Heritage as the director, I went from parliamentary affairs in the Prime Minister's office to the director of policy at Heritage. And I take my first ever briefing in copyright, and I'm told by officials, it's really hard. I'll never understand it, and you'll know when you've done it right because everyone will be mad at you. Well, I can't imagine a less exciting way to be a political staffer, here to do something. And so back to the bottom of the line. And so then when I ended up on the outside and at Music Canada and trying to provide some of this worldview, the unwillingness of industry sort of at large to buy into people don't care, buy into this message isn't working. Buy into we need to meet people at their level rather than just be self-assured in our own correctness. You know, that holds back music, that holds back cultural industries, that holds back railroads. You know, no matter whether you're here in Canada or in Australia or anywhere else, if you're not willing to meet government at where they are at, you're not going to be successful.
Right. You described to me a long time ago about, you know, thinking about a meeting with officials or staffers in your particular department of government, and, you know, trying to come up with a message that resonates with them to get them to leave their office and tell a colleague, listen to what I just heard, and to pass it on and to create traction out of an idea. And, you know what, for someone who didn't have as much experience within government and getting something done that way, I always viewed it as, you know, we're supposed to be here to help, right? Help the government make informed decisions. And, you know, some of the challenges you've described is that sometimes it can turn into a gatekeeper function as opposed to, you know, just almost preventing the unintended from happening as opposed to helping the intended happen. And so, you know, is that a fair assessment for how you would advise people looking to help their organization or business head into government and affect change, like a caution?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to understand all the pieces, right? And I think you have to understand the formal role those pieces play, and then you have to understand the sort of, you know, what we write in our Canadian textbook 101, and then you know how it actually works. And I think that's a worthy look. You know, for us, we have a bureaucracy in Canada that is to advise on technical issues to political decision makers, and then enact decisions by political decision makers, whether they agree with the bureaucracy or not. And so, you know, I think on copyright, nobody wants to break copyright. Nobody wants to be the one who changes a word and has it go terribly wrong. And officials are sort of in charge of making sure that young, inexperienced political staffers who were the advisor to the Minister of Natural Resources yesterday and are now the advisor to the Minister of Canadian Heritage don't mess up a system that is roughly working. Where it gets into trouble is when you know, officialdom you know, becomes the sort of guiding line and not the goals of the government. That's when it gets really tricky, because then you're not really sure who to talk to.
Right. I remember you had given me a pep talk once before I headed out to have a meeting with an official, and you described the goal of the meeting, right, is to get that political interest and support for something that matters industry wide. You know, you have industry acceptance of something that just needs to happen. You need to convince that person to pull the sword out of the rock. And that example has always stuck with me. And I apply that in many facets to my current role here with Gowling WLG in litigation in any context. And so I want you to describe this fascinating metaphor of pulling the sword out of the rock, because a lot of people can learn from this.
So, I mean, I think it's got a couple of steps to it, right? I mean, the first step is political staff aren't actually waiting for you to walk in their door today and give them new work.
They're not?
Right? I mean, they've got lots, yeah, exactly. They've got lots to do. They are, you know, some of our most talented young people charged with massive responsibility here in Canada. And they are meeting with you on the shoulder of other important meetings that they are likely more excited about. And so based on that, you got to go to them with a message that says, we are this group of people. And, you know, for Music Canada, that is, we are the representatives for the major labels. And none of this is a magic trick. Everything is out in front of you.
Right.
We like to work with our partners in the rest of the music industry, and therefore would like to tell you about this coalition of people who agree on the following things. We have tried to slay this dragon that is seriously threatening this group of people who are, you know, not only great stakeholders, but also voters, which is always something important to remind people of. And we've tried the following things on our own. We've done this, we've done this, and we've done this. And upon our research, we have discovered that there is a sword in the stone that will slay this dragon. And we promise that not only this group, but the town down the way will also support this action. And we looked, and you're the only person who can pull this sword.
Yeah.
Now, as I say, this is not necessarily a perfect path and won't always work. But the stakeholders who came to me with that message were the ones that I was always a little more interested in. Because when it turns out you do the homework and you can do something about it, and it has been lined up that people are interested in you doing it, and the costs of slaying that dragon are not out of the norm for the government, you stand a way better chance of doing it, which doesn't sound that impressive. But Ryan, I will tell you the opposite approach. The opposite approach is, hey, why don't you know this? And why are you doing this wrong? And here's 57 pages of legal arguments about why your government is bad, so fix it. Shockingly, the one works better than the other.
Yes. Maybe not too shockingly. Well, maybe in the last few minutes we can discuss then, I wanted to ask you about where we're at with the copyright review, or I guess we're on to reform, hopefully. And, I know that there's still many difficulties ahead for you and for your members and for the people you're working with. So, what do you expect in the coming months, coming year, hopefully not too long, with implementing some of these great recommendations? Because I know there are a number that touch exactly on what your partners, artists, members need to have happen immediately, or if not 20 years ago, right? So you talked about 1997 being when some changes were made. So if we're talking about just updating some provisions that were updated that long ago, so I'm just interested in your thoughts on the sort of short-term challenges as we look to put a bow on a review and move to reform.
Well, I think that one of the biggest things is just sort of trying to close the book on the parliamentary review. The government has started a new white paper process. Music Canada and our sort of colleagues and friends are looking forward to taking part in that. But a white paper is a long way away from legislative change. Obviously, also in Canada and with the US connection, there's a 30-month period that started in July for the enactment of what we call here CUSMA, and USMCA for our American colleagues. That includes term extension for our songwriter friends. Right. So we're very interested in seeing that enacted as negotiated, without sort of attempts to lessen the negotiated value of it. And we hope that changes are made to the Copyright Act that reflect the things that were in the Shifting Paradigms report out of the Heritage Committee. Yeah. I'll tell you that one of the non-copyright areas that sort of affects this is sort of the ongoing sort of global interest in the regulation of the internet. And our big push is to make sure the government is doing that work and laying that groundwork for what sort of lies in the future, without forgetting about the significance and importance of that underlying copyright framework.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Patrick, this has been, we could extend this for hours, I think, and dive into each of these topics with you. I really appreciate your time. And I just want to say that you're doing excellent work in the short time that you've been made CEO, which is very deserving. You bring such a fresh view and fresh perspectives and fresh ideas to Music Canada and all of the partners that you rallied around Music Canada in the name of just improvements for the lives of creators. So I just want to thank you and wish you all the best. And thanks for joining in conversation with Gowling WLG today.
Well, thank you, and thank you to Gowling's WLG for their efforts in trying to help lay these conversations out, and hopefully we can all find a way to work together again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks.